So welcome to our class on Make Peace, a strategic guide for achieving lasting peace in Israel. We are up to the section 4 of the book. This specifically is chapter 10, which is about cultivating confidence. And the chapter, so this section of the book is going to cover a couple of pieces here. The first chapter 10 is going to talk about the Rebbe's analysis of the psychological factors that lead to Israel's continuous capitulation, and he provides a deep-rooted solution in the face of international pressure. Then chapter 11 explores the underlying dynamics of Israel's international relations with a particular emphasis on the relationship with the United States, which supports Israel but also restrains Israel. And the Rebbe also gives some ideas into realpolitik. Chapter 12 is going to talk about the Israeli government actively encouraging Jewish people to settle the entire land of Israel, the entire God-given land, and particularly those areas that have been called occupied territories, but they were God-given land, so we just stand up for that one. Chapter 13 argues from a pragmatic standpoint that Israel alone should govern themselves, and any other form of governance would cause further tragedy for everyone involved. 14 offers practical guidance on the rules of engagement and prisoner exchange, which also becomes a topic for international discussion and scrutiny.
Yep.
And then chapter 15 of this section then transitions from discussing questions of how to deal with the enemies to explain how our relationship with one another impacts our national security. It talks about, again, the relationship of Jews amongst Jews, Jews in the diaspora, Jews in the Holy Land, and that the connection we have demands that we educate ourselves and take proper actions to promote Israel's security and well-being everywhere. So, chapter 15. It's an interesting story here that Rebbe brings down. And again, we're always looking to the Torah for guidance in any situation. What's the Torah guidance? The Rebbe goes back to the stories of the Meraglim. The Meraglim were the spies that when the Jews left Egypt and we traveled through the desert, met them Mount Sinai, and then it's time to go to Israel. We get to Israel, and Moses sends in spies to spy out the land, with their assignment being, check out what's the best way to conquer. They came back with a very negative report. And that caused a tremendous tragedy. And the end result was 40 years of wandering in the desert, that generation would not go into Israel. They would die in the desert, and only their children would be the ones to go into into the land of Israel itself. So let's see what the Rebbe says about this, right? The root cause of concessions is a lack of Jewish pride. The Rebbe says the root of all these problems lies in the following approach, that the house of Israel is like all the nations, believing that the Jewish people need to adopt the ways of the Gentiles, when in reality, the Jewish people are a light unto the nations, exemplars of moral and spiritual leadership, and yet we act in the opposite manner, striving to imitate any practice that we see amongst the Gentiles. So this misguided concern over potential international response, rather than Jewish values and identity, that's the root, that's the problem. And this behavior stems from an inferiority complex, a fear of the non-Jewish world, and the foreign God, so to speak, within the Jewish psyche. And it manifests as a constant obsession with the question, well, what will the Goyim think? What will the Gentiles, the nations of the world, what will they think about us? This deep state of internal golus, exile, affects the whole Jewish psyche. While the Jewish people as a whole are in physical exile, we get so paranoid we get into a spiritual, individual exile within our souls, worrying about what will the others think, what will everybody else think about it, right? So the proper behavior of how a Jew should approach these things. In his private life, he may be a religious Jew, but when it comes to the communal matters, he acts as if the creator of the world does not exist, God forbid. He goes out in the public and he becomes like everybody else. That's not the right way. The right way is to be Jewish and be proudly Jewish and be openly Jewish and stay within the core values of what Judaism has to say. God's sovereignty isn't just us at home. God's sovereignty is the entire world. One of the quotes that's often said within the chaplaincy is, don't tell God how big your problems are, tell your problems how big your God is. So, is God master of the universe? Is it all in his hands? Or only select parts? Only in the synagogue, not at home, not at work, maybe at home, but not at work, right? Not at school, maybe go to Jewish school, but like, no, if God is the master of the universe, he's the master of the entire universe. Knowing that when one behaves according to the directive of the code of Jewish law, they are under the protection of the creator and ruler of the world, and the hearts of ministers and kings are in God's hands. This is one of the quotes that I always think about when people get upended about politics, right? The hearts of ministers and kings are in God's hands. God runs the world. So whatever they're trying to do, if God permits it, it'll happen. If he doesn't, there's no chance in hell anyway. So it truly is trusting and believing that God is the master of the whole universe. Nothing happens without his go. By following God's will, by doing Torah and mitzvahs, the Jewish people merit the divine intervention in world affairs and shaping events positively. It's because of our Torah and mitzvahs. It's because of our acts of goodness and kindness. It's because of our tzedakah, on a daily basis, on a regular basis. It's because of putting on tefillin, lighting Shabbos. All of these physical mitzvahs, those are the things which we connect with God, and therefore, in the merit of those things, God runs the world in our favor. The Rebbe said that there are Jews whose inferiority complex towards the Gentiles and the Gentile culture is so profound that they're unable to free themselves from this dread feeling. And as a result, of course, that then affects their capitulation to anything the world demands of them and Israel. But the security of the Holy Land should be in God's hands, not dependent on anyone else, and not fearing anyone else's thoughts or opinions. So, where do we see this example? The Meraglim. We go back to the spies, right? In the story of the spies that went into Israel, the command was, right? The command intent was go find out what's the easiest way to conquer the land. Then ask your opinions of we can or cannot, or go find out the easiest way to conquer the land, right? And they come back with a story of their giants. Quote, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in theirs. Notice the language in the Chumash, in the Torah. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in theirs. These Meraglim, these spies that went in, they suggest that the ancient inhabitants of the land viewed the Israelites, the Jewish people, as grasshoppers precisely because that's how the Israelite spies perceived themselves. The spies' own feelings of inferiority shaped how they were seen by others. It starts with us. Now remember, there were 10 Meraglim, there were 10 spies. 8 came back terrified. 2, Yeshua, who would later become Joshua, this next ruler of Israel, and Caleb ben Yefuneh. These dissenting spies ultimately led the Jewish people into Israel. They're the ones who stayed alive all the way through the 40 years of the desert to actually lead the Jews in. They declared confidently when coming back from that spying expedition, God is with us, which reflects their deep faith in divine support. God wants to help us. We have to make that connection. We have to do our mitzvahs. We have to connect with him. But God wants to help us. The Rebbe said that the contemporary spies, so to speak, are those who advocate governing the land of Israel with the mentality we were grasshoppers in our own eyes, and that mindset, that fear towards the Gentile nations, just as the men of stature were perceived as a threat by the spies. So in other words, if we're afraid of the nations, just like the spies were afraid of the people currently living in Canaan when it was time to conquer. Now, we have the benefit of hindsight, so we say, well, of course we conquered. God helped us, and Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down, right? We all got that, right? But that's hindsight. In the moment, looking forward, can we have that kind of bitachon, that kind of trust? Now, the Rebbe does not minimize the gravity of the pressure that Israel's under. The Rebbe says the Gentile nations are the majority, and they exert immense pressure on Israel. Let no one claim that this pressure is insignificant. The pressure is constant, it's overwhelming, often manifests as threats to withhold vital aid, money, and weapons. Yet, despite this overwhelming pressure, Caleb and Yeshua declared, if God is with us, we will prevail, no matter the odds. If God is with us, we will prevail, no matter what the odds. Indeed, it is evident that the Gentiles would have made peace with the Jewish people's rightful ownership of the land of Israel, if not for the fact that they saw the Jewish people themselves behaving in a manner of we were like grasshoppers in their eyes, and therefore so we were in theirs. In other words, it's because of our own inadequacy that the nations of the world keep pushing at us, right? We've seen how many times that when nations of the world told Israel, you can't do that, and we did it anyway, a slap of the hand and a rebuking, and then go back to business. Business as usual, right? Nothing has actually changed. So if we would stop being afraid of the threats, if we would trust in God and do our Torah and mitzvahs, that would give us the strength. But this is not a new concept. This is not a new concept, because the Torah warns us that if the Jewish people fail to follow God's will, we will be punished with irrational fear, which is vividly characterized as the sound of a wind-blown leaf will send them fleeing as though from a sword. Now, we've all felt fear. We've all felt unreasonable fear. I still don't understand why the sight of a big spider sends chills down my spine. Mm-hmm. Oh, come on, I can step on this thing, right? It is irrational fear, right? But at the same time, we have to have the strength to overcome that. We have to acknowledge what it is. We were grasshoppers in their eyes. We have to stop. We have to stop with that and go back and be strong and realize that we're strong with God. Anything goes. Hear what the Rebbe says here. May it be God's will that the Jewish people cease to fear the shadow of the mountains, challenges that appear daunting. And in truth, these are not real mountains at all. They're merely the sound of a driven leaf, a detached leaf separated from the tree that gives its life. The Torah acknowledges that there may be some amongst the Jewish people who, chas v'shalom, succumb to the fear. It may be so intense that they can convince other Jews to share in their trepidation. However, the Torah declares a Jew must not fear the sound of a driven leaf. Our only fear should be God, God alone. And this was exemplified by Yosef HaTzadik, when Joseph declared, I fear God alone, only God. When one fears the Holy One, blessed be He, this nullifies all other fears. And this holds true even if the fears are substantive. How much more so does it apply when the fears are as insubstantial as a driven leaf. And in our own case, regarding threats facing the Jewish people, the fears are even less significant than a leaf. If we maintain our relationship with God, God takes care of us, and therefore there's nothing we have yet to fear. But we have this internal mental gullus, exile. We're trapped within these non-Jewish values that we're living in this exile, surrounded by foreign cultures, conceptions, hierarchies. It's the ultimate reason the Jewish people continue to make self-destructive decisions. It's a psychological paradigm shift. We need to get out of that gullus mentality, that exile mindset, and understand that God runs the world, and we stick close with God. He takes care of the rest. So it comes down that the real solution to this gullus mentality, this exile mentality, is that we have to be like Yeshua and Caleb, who stood firm in their faith and their conviction, even in the face of the overwhelming majority of spies' cowardice. They were 2 out of the 10. 8 were saying, "Oh, terrible, 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 we'll never make it, we can't survive." The code of Jewish law opens up with the teaching, to get up as like a lion in the morning, and to be as bold as a leopard. Bold as a leopard. Do not be fazed by anything else. Be bold as a leopard to serve your king. Another example, Mordechai. Mordechai HaTzadik, Mordechai in the story of Purim, right? He stood strong in his commitment to Jewish values, and he defied the powerful Haman. Now, Haman was the second to the king. He was the viceroy, right? And everyone in the whole country was bowing down to him whenever he came by. Mordechai refused to bow, especially because Haman was wearing his getchka, his idol, on a chain around his neck, right? So Mordechai refused to bow. And this attitude is characterized by strength, confidence, and the ability to respond with resolve when bullied into making concessions that undermine Jewish interests. In an unshakable commitment to Torah, which is the true source of Jewish power, Mordechai stood tall. Now, we've given the examples of Caleb and Yeshua and Caleb, and we've talked about Mordechai. But that's been a while since those days, right? What about in our lifetime? In our lifetime here and now, right? So the author here shares a story about Sarah Nachshon. Sarah Nachshon was a courageous Chabad woman, a pioneering resident of the Jewish settlement of Kiryat Arba, which is on the outskirts of Hebron, and how her conviction helped break the restriction on Jewish settlements in Hebron. In March of 1975, Sarah and her husband, Baruch, who was a famous Jewish artist, Baruch Nachshon, they celebrated the birth and the bris of their 9th son. As residents of Kiryat Arba, they gave their son a bris milah, a circumcision, at Ma'aris HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah, Avram Avinu, where Avram is buried, right? Abraham was the first to have a bris. They had their son have a bris at the cave of Machpelah. The bris was celebrated with lots of fanfare. Now, the Israeli army actually arrested Baruch for doing the bris at this location, which would offend the Muslims. But that's what they did. No fear. Tragically, 5 months later, in the summer, the infant, Avram Yedidia, passed away from sudden infant death. Sarah made the resolute decision that she would bury her son in Hebron, despite the government's strict prohibitions. Her heroic actions created the first significant crack in a long-standing ban on Jewish presence in Hebron. Nachshon recounts her experience. When my 5-month-old son, who was born in Hebron and received his circumcision at Maris HaMachpelah, the cave of the patriarchs, when he passed away, I decided that I must bury him in the old city of Hebron. I conveyed my wishes to Rabbi Moshe Levinger, the rabbi of Kiryat Arba, who transmitted my request to the Prime Minister's office. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the Defense Minister Shimon Peres expressly forbade the burial. Now, I was not sure what to do. I called Rabbi Gedalia Koenig of Yerushalayim, and he encouraged me to act upon my wishes. And he told me that the cemetery was the key to the city. If you take back the cemetery, you take back Hebron. And his encouragement gave me the strength. On my way from the hospital in Yerushalayim to Hebron, soldiers stopped me. After 2 hours had passed, the head of the IDF Central Command arrived, and he told me that I had two choices. Either bury your son in Yerushalayim or in Kiryat Arba, since we intend to relinquish the old city of Hebron to the Arabs. That's what he said. He openly admitted that they were planning to give it away. Incredulously, I responded, how can you relinquish Hebron? It's one of the holiest cities of Israel. And he told me, no fairy tales, please, forget about it. So I decided that no matter what, I would take my son to Hebron. Many soldiers came to prevent me from driving further. So I got out of the car and began to walk down the highway towards Hebron. Now remember, she's carrying her deceased son. I passed roadblock after roadblock, and finally, they said that the defense minister, Shimon Peres, had relented and allowed the burial. As I heard over the radio, let the mad woman from Hebron go and bury her son. At that point, the soldiers drove me to the cemetery. In other words, the foot soldiers were ready to help, but they were under orders, right? And so as soon as they got the letter buried, they helped. It was dark when we came to the cemetery. Many soldiers and residents attended the burial. I spoke at the burial and said, Avraham, our forefather, purchased a burial plot for his wife Sarah here in Hebron. My name is Sarah, and I have now brought my son Avraham to be buried in Hebron more than 3,000 years later. Sarah Nachshon's determination served as a step for Jewish people to return to Hebron. However, her contributions to the rebuilding of Jewish life in the city did not end there. Initially, that was in 75, right? So, Beis Hadassah was a building in Hebron purchased by the Jews in 1893. It had served as Hadassah Hospital, providing free medical care to both Jews and Arabs, until Arab mobs vandalized it in 1929 in the Arab riots. Beginning in 1975, a group of yeshiva students began to clean the abandoned building and attempted to resettle it. However, the Israeli government, concerned about provoking the international community and the Arab world, repeatedly removed the students, the rabbinical students, from the premises and ultimately jailed them. That struggle went on until 1979. In response to the government's restrictions to Jewish residents in Hebron, a group of courageous Jewish women and their children decided to make a bold move. The group was led by Sarah Nachshon and Miriam Levinger, who was a prominent leader of the Jewish movement in Gush Emunim, which worked to resettle Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. These 15 brave women, along with their 35 children, that's 40 people, they moved into Beis Hadassah, and they stayed there for 10 months, defying the government's orders and asserting their rights to live in the historic Jewish city. 40 people living in an abandoned building without proper plumbing, right? 10 months. It all began during a gathering at Rav Moshe Levinger's home, which my husband Baruch attended. These gatherings were held frequently to strategize how we could ensure a Jewish presence in Hebron. In 1979, we were deeply concerned about Hebron's future, especially after Begin signed the Camp David Accords, and he banished the Jewish settlement in Abu Roads and the Sinai, with Yamit also in the Sinai, scheduled to be cleared out next. We feared that Hebron and Kiryat Arba would follow soon. My husband proposed that we establish a settlement in Hebron establish a settlement in Hebron to cement the Jewish claim. We decided that woman would lead this effort, as Begin, being a proper English gentleman, would not forcibly remove women. The following morning, Miriam Levinger came to my door and we began discussing the details. Now, due to the fact the government had tapped their phones, they went door to door to gather the women to join people and collect supplies. They did not do anything on the phone. So one night at 2 a.m., we loaded our children and our supplies into a truck and we drove to the street behind Beis Hadassah. And with the help of the yeshiva students from yeshiva near in Kiryat Arba, we climbed up a ladder and went through a window to get into the building. And once inside, the children began singing, which of course surprised the guard standing guard on the outside. And they asked, "How did you get in there?" And one of the 3-year-old children said, "Our forefather Jacob, he carried us in on a ladder." The women and children lived in Beis Hadassah without running water, and since the government would not permit them to re-enter once they left, they stayed. They did not leave the building. Ultimately, this brave protest led the government to partially capitulate and allow some Jewish settlements in Hebron, paving the way for the admittedly limited Jewish presence in the city today. In the early months of their time in Beis Hadassah, the Rebbe approvingly referred to the bravery of Sarah Nachshon and the women who were with her as the antithesis of the spy's fearfulness. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, "May it be God's will that at the very least the Israeli government will learn from the righteous women of Israel who cherish the land and from the code of Jewish law. These women conducted themselves in a manner contrary to the perspective of the biblical spies who said we were grasshoppers in our own eyes. These courageous women conquered Hebron." At some point in the challenge, Sarah Nachshon sent a letter to the Rebbe asking for his guidance. Now, the Rebbe responded in a public address. "Today I received a letter from a woman who has been living in Beis Hadassah in Hebron for months with many young children. She is being disallowed from living in Hebron by fellow Jews. The army, which engages in self-sacrifice to protect Israel, has been deployed to forbid more Jews from entering Beis Hadassah, a building that everyone, even the Arabs admit that belongs to the Jews. The army does not allow any Jewish men into the building. This woman asked me, how much longer will this last? What can I answer her? She tells me that she is there with other righteous Jewish women." So in other words, as much as he valued Nachshon's self-sacrifice, he's not going to tell a young woman with children to stay in these substandard conditions. But he stated very publicly the government of Israel is shirking its responsibility. And he made again the biblical parallel. The situation is reminiscent of the Torah story about the daughters of Tzlofchad. The daughters approached Moshe, the leader of the generation, and requested an inheritance in the land of Israel. So their father had passed away and had not left any sons. The land had not been distributed yet. And so they wanted to say, why is our father's family being left out when he passed away beforehand? And it wasn't he didn't die from sin, right? And even Moses, the great spiritual leader and prophet, he did not know what to answer him. So he said, I must bring your question to God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be he, responded to Moses and said that the daughters of Tzlofchad are correct. Give them an inheritance in the land. So the Rebbe concluded, if the women in Hebron have such great affection for the land of Israel, the people of Israel deserve to conquer Judea and Samaria. Nachshon recalls that the Rebbe's encouragement gave her the resolve to remain in Beis Hadassah with her children for several more months. And ultimately, the result of the woman's tenacious insistence on remaining in Beis Hadassah, the government finally allowed the space to be reclaimed by Jewish people, and this served as another important stepping stone towards renewing Jewish community in Hebron. I have a friend in Hebron. It's a funny story because I have a friend in Hebron who he's the shliach, he's the Chabad rabbi in Hebron. Now one to ask the question is, why does Hebron need a Chabad rabbi? The only people that go to Hebron and settle as Jews there are fanatically religious Jews. So what do they need a Chabad rabbi for, right? The answer is because he's former military and he's there for the Israeli soldiers who have to protect the people in Hebron. And so he brings hot chocolate and candies to the soldiers on night patrol and things like that. Now, he's in Hebron, which is a very Arab area, and it's had a history of a lot of challenges. So here's a guy, so with a weekday, Shabbos or Yom Tov, he's always carrying a rifle. It's everyday carry in Hebron. So we see the story of a more modern story of someone who refuses to bow to the concerns of what will the goyim say, what will the goyim think, and it's our job to follow that idea. So again, using the story of Mordechai who refused to bow, the Rebbe, he uses that example that we should not be intimidated by our contemporary Haman type people. Just as Mordechai overcame formidable challenges by his resolute devotion, we have to do the same thing. So in order to rectify the mistakes of the past, from now on, the Israeli government must conduct itself in a proper manner. No territories should be handed over, and the border must be strictly guarded. And when they are faced with demands to hand over territories, they must stand firm, like Mordechai, and refuse to kneel or bow in the face of pressure. The Rebbe commented on this point in response to Israel's protest against Carter's administration's vote against Israel, 1980, the UN Security Council resolution. After tremendous outcry from the Jewish community, Carter backpedaled, and he commended the Jewish people for speaking up in their own defense. And the Rebbe said, since HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, performed such an overt miracle in our times, namely that a great world power capitulated to a small state, the correct response is not complacency. On the contrary, the Jewish people must continue with unwavering resolve, neither kneeling nor bowing down like Mordechai. The people of Israel must stand firm and embody the principle of neither kneel nor bow in relation to the integrity of the land of Israel. They cannot be intimidated by pressure. Instead, we must approach the pressure with the mindset of, and here's a quote, a pasuk from the Torah, hatch a plot and it will be foiled. Speak your peace, but it will not stand, for God is with us. If the Jewish people cultivate this perspective, the fear of the Jews will befall their enemies. And when the children of Israel conduct themselves truly as Jews, rejecting idolatry, which also can be like the prevailing culture, and embrace the entire Torah, their fear falls upon the nations surrounding them, eliminating the need for war. And this is the only path to establishing genuine peace. Again, quoting from the Torah, I will make peace in the land. When the nations of the world see the people of Israel standing firmly in all matters, referring to the observance of Torah and mitzvahs, neither kneeling nor bowing, it moves them to respect the people of Israel. We have to be proud of our heritage. We have to be proud of our connection with God. And when we will proudly stand tall and manifest our Torah and mitzvahs observance, then the world will stand off, will stand back. The Lord will give strength to his people. He will bless his people with peace. Notice the word strength to his people comes first, and then he will bless his people with peace. Strength comes first. It's insufficient to merely study and observe Torah. Rather, one must embody the Torah with strength, firm, unwavering commitment. And there's no strength but Torah. This means the Jew's strength and fortitude comes from the Torah and from nothing else. Not from a position of power, not from a position of honor, not from money. It is our conduct as Jews to bring out the Lord will bless his people with peace. So summarizing the chapter, we explored the Rebbe's analysis of the psychological factors undermining Israel's resolve in the struggle of the land of Israel. The Rebbe diagnoses this root cause of self-defeating policy as a lack of Jewish pride, an assimilationist tendency, an exile mentality. The exemplars of this challenges are the biblical spies who spurned God's gift of the land out of their own fear. The Rebbe's prescription for overcoming these challenges is to cultivate authentic Jewish pride and strength. Many of the apparent challenges are illusory, a mere leaf rustling in the wind. Some are real, but a resolute mindset, tapping into the well of Torah values, allows us to overcome them. This empowers us to tap into an infinite source of resiliency and courage. Our generation is called on to emulate the biblical heroes of Yeshua and Caleb, who stood up to the majority of cowardly Jewish leaders, thus inheriting the land. We must learn from Mordechai, who was fearless against mortal danger at the hands of one of the world's most powerful political leaders. And finally, we can learn from the contemporary example of Sarah Nachshon and the other women who accompanied her, who stood strong in their faith against a government that eventually capitulated, even under an international pressure. We have to stand strong. We have to be strong, proud, observant, blatant, in your face Jews.
Yep.